Good morning. Thank you for joining us today, January 19th, 2023, for our webinar entitled California Pay Transparency Act, where pay and culture intersect. I am Denise Keddy, and I'm your moderator for this session. A couple of quick housekeeping notes before I introduce today's expert panel. The webinar will run about 55 to 60 minutes. Please take a moment now to visit the handouts area on your dashboard to download a copy of today's handouts. If you don't know how to do that, click View on your menu bar and make sure there is a check mark next to the sections for handouts and questions so that you can download and either follow along or refer to this presentation after the event. Don't worry if you need to leave the webinar a few minutes early before the conclusion of the webinar today. A webinar link will be sent out to you, and it will also be posted on the Ethos YouTube channel tomorrow. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them to the Q&A area on your dashboard anytime during the presentation. If you'd like your question directed to a specific panelist, please note that when sending in your question. Just a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and all accompanying materials are protected by copyright. Our presentation today is intended for information purposes only and should not be relied on in reaching a conclusion in any area of law. The information offered during our webinar is as of today, January 19th, 2023. As always, we recommend that you consult with your own legal counsel to address your specific situation to ensure you have the most current information on legal matters. Let's get into our session today. Among the slate of new labor laws in 2023 was this California Pay Transparency Act. We received a lot of questions around this new law, and I think this new law is making business owners a bit nervous. Thankfully, today our expert panel is going to discuss best practices and actions you need to take now to comply. Our legal expert today is Curtis Ryan. He is an associate at the law firm Merhab, Robertson & Clarkson in the firm's transactional department, where he advises clients in real estate, finance, and employment law. In addition to his outstanding work, Curtis has contributed to articles in law journals and lectures at the business and political science departments of the American Jewish University. Curtis has been recognized as a rising star by superlawyers.com for the last 6 years, from 2017 to 2022. And as we all know, Curtis is a huge baseball fan, along with our next expert, who is a huge Angels fan. Our human capital expert is Linda Duffy, founder and president of Ethos Human Capital Solutions. Linda is known as the people problem solver, and Linda and her team are known for building the magic of the human connection with their consulting, recruiting, training, and organizational development programs. Linda and her team works with your company by developing strategies for business leaders to get the right systems, people, and culture in place for your organization so that you as a business owner can focus on running your business and achieving your goals. And today we have the pleasure of having Laura Conover, president of Conover Consulting Incorporated. Laura has over 25 years of experience in assisting organizations on employee pay and people management issues. She's worked with clients in several industries, including a few Fortune 500 companies, and has provided litigation support and was appointed by the EEOC as a consultant on a compensation matter involving a manufacturing company. And as Laura just mentioned to us, she is a college football fan, and she loves bacon, which has excited the rest of the panelists now for lunch. So, Linda, can you take it away this morning?
I can, thank you. And yes, I learned that about Laura too this morning. I've known her for years, but didn't know we both were such big bacon fans. So anyway, we have a short agenda, but we have a lot of content, if that makes any sense to you. And so first and foremost, we're just going to do a little history of California's equal pay laws, and then talk about this one that's going into effect right now, which is really just an extension of what we already have in place, and it's just an expansion, I should say, of it. So we're going to talk about that. We have our legal expert here, as always, to talk about the legal requirements with us, and then Laura and I are really going to focus on the practical and cultural implications, because most of the time on these webinars, we're focused on the legal aspects, but this one has some far-reaching I don't know, things that we're going to have to deal with as a result of having some conversations with our employees when they, want to know how their pay has been decided. So let's jump right into it regarding a little bit of history on California equal pay law. So we actually have had an equal pay law in California longer than the federal government had one. Theirs didn't get passed till 1963. California passed theirs in 1949. And then the next really big change to it came in 2015 when Governor Brown signed the California Fair Pay Act. So this strengthened that equal pay law in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to go through all of these on here, but just know it's like it just made the requirement that companies had to sort of justify to the penny any differences in pay. So if you have 5 people in the same job classification, and you're paying them differently, government says you need to be able to sort of explain to us why you're paying them differently, and there has to be justifiable reasons for doing so. So that was one of the big changes that took place. And then 2017, it stopped being just about gender, sex, right? You have to pay men and women the same. And then they added race and ethnicity as protected categories under the equal pay law. 2018, it expanded further because it now covered public employers, which before it was just private employers. And this was the change most of you remember when you were prohibited from asking an applicant their salary history, right? So we all had to revise our application forms. We had to train our managers and supervisors and recruiters and everybody not to ask that question and instead ask about salary expectations, right? And all of this, as Laura will tell you, is just, it's the government trying to make sure that we're paying people fairly, right? So these were the changes. And then of course, 2023, we have the Pay Transparency Act. So for those of you that were on the call with us, in December when we did this law, we've talked about it briefly, but now we're really going to spend some time just on this law today going through the details. And so Curtis, I'm hoping that you'll jump in on this with me, and Laura, of course, you're always welcome to chime in as well. But let's start by talking about, there's 3 sort of different levels in this law depending on your head count. And as my note says here, headcount includes all employees, not just in California. So the government said, we're going to count employees the same way we did for COVID supplemental sick pay. Okay, and that is to say that if you have 15 employees nationwide and you have at least 1 in California, tag, you're it on this law. You have to comply with it. You don't have to have 15 employees in California. Same thing with the 100-employee mark. So it includes temps, it includes part-time, anybody that you basically are going to issue a W-2 to, you're going to count them in your head count. Curtis, anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. And just to remember, just to emphasize that this just barely went into effect 19 days ago. So we're still trying to figure out what this means, what all the gray areas are. We don't have too many details. So basically, all we have are the code, the bill, the actual text of the bill that was passed. And right now, we're trying to work on that and see what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and the Department of Fair Employment and Housing has, or the DLSE has published some FAQs, but you'll find them with the Equal Pay Law, or the California Fair Pay Act. That's where they actually discuss this. So there's just a couple of FAQs they've adjusted, a couple they've added. So like Curtis says, we're not going to know for a while how some of these things are going to get enforced, but this is where we are right now. So Curtis, let's talk about for employers that have 1 or more employees, right? So what are the rules around that?
So if an employer has 1 or more employees, which is basically going to be all employers, the only obligation under the new Pay Transparency Act is that the employer provide, upon request, a copy of the pay scale or pay range to any current employee. And the goal of the legislature in passing this law is, well, like the title says, transparency. The state wants every employee to know what each other employee in that position is making. So let's say I go to my employer and I say, employer, please give me a copy of the pay scale or pay range for my position. the employer does that, I can then take that pay scale or pay range and talk to my colleagues to see one, well, first take a step back. Once I get that, I can see where I fall in that pay scale. See if I'm at the bottom, at the top, in the middle. Is that appropriate for my experience, my education, my skills? And then I can go and I can talk to my peers and see where they're at on the pay scale. And if I see that I have peers that are of a different sex or gender, or I have peers that are of a different nationality or race than I am, and they're making more or less, then I should easily be able to find pay discrepancies and either bring those pay discrepancies to the attention of my employer to get them fixed or redressed, or I can bring a claim with the California Civil Rights Department to get the state to force the employer to correct those pay discrepancies.
Right. So let's take a look at a specific example, right? So what's a pay scale under this law? You know, it's what the employer reasonably expects to pay to fill the position. And we're going to talk a second about job postings, and that's going to come into play. So what an employer reasonably expects to pay to fill the position. So when you're talking about giving that answer to current employees, it could be a formal salary range. Like you might have done that work and set up salary ranges using us or Laura, somebody, you know, getting market data, the whole thing, right? But it could also be just what you're currently paying people. So let's say, you know, ABC company has 6 employees in the same position, warehouse worker, you know, one's at 20, one's at 21, all the way through to 25. You could just take that and go, oh, that's my range. I pay from $20 to $25 an hour, right? And there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. We're going to talk about some of the implications of that, but there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. Okay, so that's everybody's going to be subject to that part of the law. And then now if you have 15 or more employees, you're going to be subject to this, which is pay scale disclosure in all of your job postings. So if you're posting a job yourself, you know, you're going out on Indeed, LinkedIn, wherever you're going, you have to include the job, the pay scale on that. And what's interesting is as some of the FAQs were updated, they specifically said that you cannot link to a separate document and make people go find the pay scale that way. You cannot use a QR code. You have to actually put it in the job posting itself. Curtis, anything you want to add to that?
That's a good description. My only comment would be that since the first, I've been going online and looking at different job postings just to see what companies are doing, to see what it looks like. And for the most part, I have seen that job postings are requiring are including the pay ranges. But I've noticed that there's been a wide range of pay ranges. So it's kind of curious to see what companies have been doing so far in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and
can I chime in on that, Linda?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's when Curtis started talking about wide ranges, that's exactly what was going through my mind at the moment, because I have seen and read about very broad ranges, like a CFO job where the range, quote unquote, is $100,000 to $250,000 a year. That's very clearly very broad. And so just to put some numbers to this, because you know that's my world, like how do we really put appropriate numbers to this discussion? In part, if you see a range that's posted or you are tempted to post one that has a midpoint and then a minimum that is more than 20% below that midpoint and a maximum that's more than 20% above, that typically, with some executive jobs, yes, it can be broader, but for non-executive jobs, if something is much broader than that, it's pretty unrealistic as a salary range structure.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you and I attended, you know, an employment law update last fall with an attorney we both know, and you know, they made a comment about this as well, right? It's like somebody could challenge that in theory to say, you know, you're really not trying to comply with this law. You're just, you know, throwing out huge numbers. And yet, on the other hand, I feel the pain for employers because, you know, especially in the case like CFO, who knows what you're going to get, right? It's going to be a big range. And we don't necessarily want to go out and say, well, we're really planning to pay this person a couple $100,000 a year because all of our employees are going to see that, right? And that's, you know, there's no exception on this for the type of position. Doesn't matter whoever's going to be posting this on anybody's behalf. So if you have a third party doing it, you hire us to do your recruiting for you. If we posted an ad, right, we would have to include it as well. So there's really no way of getting around this. And, you know, just be careful you're not setting yourself up for someone to try to make a claim against you later for not, you know, complying with this law or, you know, trying to circumvent it. So Curtis, you remember this map? I did not update it, and I know
Yeah.
there's one change here, but you want to explain to everybody what this is?
Yeah, so Fisher Phillips is a large nationwide law firm that practices employment litigation, and they primarily defend employers. They're on the defense side, and so they do a good job of keeping track of the laws in all 50 states. And so they were able to compile information on laws of all 50 states that relate to pay discrepancy and pay equity. So this map just gives us a summary of what's going on around the state, and we can see that the trend has been for states to adopt some kind of pay equity law, and you'll see that the color that they use is arbitrary, but it's not. You'll notice that the political leanings of the states is not necessarily reflected here. So it's not a political topic, but it's really a nationwide. There's been an attempt by all states, by all people of all political philosophies, to try and develop and achieve pay equity.
Yeah, so if you have, I mean, you could be based here in California and complying with this law, but let's say you're going to go hire somebody in a different state. This is a really helpful map to go click on the state. It's interactive, so you can go click on it and you can actually see what their requirements are there as well. You know, do they have, you know, do they have something that, you know, is only specific to gender? Does they have other protected categories? The star in this case means that there's a salary history inquiry ban, you know, for applicants. Um, if it's white, and on this map there's two, but the only one that's left, I just didn't update the map last night. North Carolina apparently just passed something, but Mississippi is the only state that doesn't have some sort of state-specific pay equity law. Everybody else has something of some kind. So just always check. We just like to share this with you. Always go to that URL and just check before you know, you take certain actions in other states. So the Pay Transparency Act also for 15 or more employees includes a record retention requirement, and this is for 3 years beyond termination of employment. So for the duration of employment and then 3 more years after that, you have to maintain records of job titles and wage history for each employee, right? We're also going to tell you, we would recommend that you keep screenshots of or some record of the job postings so that you actually were complying with the law. Because if the records are not kept, then there's a rebuttable presumption in favor of the employee's claim if they do bring a claim for some violation of this law. And Curtis, do you want to share with everybody what those penalties are? They're pretty steep.
Yeah, the give me 1 second to catch up. The penalties could be anywhere between $100 and $10,000 per violation. So it could be a minor violation, but the penalties could absolutely stack up and become very expensive if an employer does not comply with this law.
Yeah, we don't want that to be any of you. So Laura, let's talk about some of the practical considerations of posting ranges, right? So like if we stick with our example of ABC company, they don't have a formal range and they have, you know, these 6 employees making between 20 and 25 an hour. So there's different ways a company can go about this, right? You can choose to post, you know, you can create your own rule, right?
Yes. Yeah, because the law says, what would you need to represent what you would reasonably expect to pay.
So in this case, let's go through these examples. So the obvious one is you could post $20 to $25 an hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about though, let's say you have somebody that's making, I mean, we've said you have somebody making $20. How are they going to feel if they see the ad and they find out, oh, I'm at the bottom of this range? Are they all of a sudden they have hope that they can get more money? Or do they think, why in the heck am I so low? Right? So that's like part of the risk if you just go with the $20 to $25 an hour. So we've talked, maybe one thing to think about doing is, do you sort of enlarge that a little bit, not a lot, right? But enlarge that a little bit and post maybe 19 to 26 or something like that. What are your feelings on that?
I think that would make sense in this kind of example. I think though too, at the base of this and the issue you're bringing up, Linda, is that yes, pay transparency and having to post ranges will generate questions from employees, and sometimes those questions are not fun for HR to engage in. But we're going to have to lean into that and be prepared and be ready to tell people, you are where you are in your salary range based on your experience level. Hopefully that's the case. They need to be in their salary range or be paid compared to other people based on their experience level, and if you have a sound performance management system based on their recent performance rating. And they need to be able to find out, well, gosh, how can I make more money here? And
Right.
hopefully if you pay for performance, then hopefully they can make more money if they become a better performer over time. Then that can be part of the messaging.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. What about the last option there, $20 to $22? I know you and I have spoken and some of your clients are talking about posting what they're referring to as a hiring range. What does that mean?
That can mean, understandably, that organizations are concerned about budgeting issues, and in the midst of that, saying, I want to post a more narrow range for hiring purposes because I'm typically not going to hire a new person in a specific job towards the higher end of my range.
Right.
Yeah, and I think, Curtis, can you chime in on that? Do you think that that can meet the kind of the letter of the law in this case?
Yeah, so far based on what we have, this would satisfy the law. It's a reasonable range that the employer reasonably expects to pay.
Okay, so then,
from our basic understanding, this range would meet that requirement.
so then take it to the next step, Curtis. What if we post any of those ranges that you see on the screen there, and then we find a stellar candidate, we want to pay them $27 an hour? Can we do that if we've posted the range at 20 to 22, let's say?
Based on what we've seen so far, yes. You could still pay if you find a stellar candidate who exceeds expectations or has more experience or more skills than you anticipated for this position. Yes, you could pay that employee $27 an hour. But the caveat would be then after you've hired that person at $27 an hour, go back and change your pay scale to $20 to $27 for that specific position.
Yeah, so we talked about this in the last webinar we did. If you find somebody, or maybe you find somebody they're not really qualified, but you like their attitude, and you're sort of going to bring them in almost like a apprentice or something like that, right? Or a more junior person. You could, in theory, bring them in below the range you posted. It does expand your range, right? Once you do that, it expands your range. And the other thing, and maybe Laura, you want to speak to this, but the other thing is maybe it's not the same position, right? Maybe now you bring them in at 19 and you call it something else. So you bring them in at 27 and you call them a senior or something, right? That happens all the time, right, Laura?
Yeah, I would rather do that than change my ranges. Now, what I'm going to talk about now has to do with a formal set of salary ranges.
Right.
If you don't have a pre-created set of formal salary ranges, then sure, you can say my informal range just got wider or broader. But if you actually have a set of formal ranges, I wouldn't change the ranges because I need to bring someone in towards the top of my range or above the range. Either I can bring them in over the top of the formal range for the particular job and say, okay, they're going to sit there for a while in that pay level until the range increases and they fall back in the range. Or,
Right.
as Linda was suggesting, I create a warehouse worker 2 and call everybody else a warehouse worker 1 at that point.
Right. All right, great advice. Okay, the last part of this, the third tier on this, is for employers with 100 or more employees. And this is an extra paid data reporting requirement. And so it's similar to the EEO-1 report that everybody has, but you have to go through, you have to collect data from Q4 of each year, so the last quarter we just closed, and then this report has to be submitted to the state on or before the second Wednesday of May. Random, I know, but I don't know how it got there. Here's the thing to know though, you need to make sure that you get all of that data in line now, so you're ready, you know, when the time comes to fill the report out. It is a separate report from the EEO-1 and the other paid data reports you're already required to do. This one has additional information on it. And essentially, this makes it easy for the state to look to see if you are in compliance with pay data laws, right? To take a, or equal pay laws, you take a look at it, you see like all of the white people make more than all of the Hispanic people, or, you know, all of the men make more than all the women, or something like that. On the surface, on the face, it's probably going to get you an investigation at some point in time. So you want to do your own analysis now. If you don't know how to do it, then contact us, contact Laura, but have somebody come in and start taking a look at this to make sure that it's set up correctly. Here's some additional information about what has to be included. We're not going to go through this. Just know if you have 100 or more employees, this is what you're looking for, and that if you have multiple establishments, you're going to be submitting a separate report. Okay, so Laura, this is the fun part now, because that's really the legal part. So now let's get into the squishy people part of it. And
Yay.
I always
do
say,
huh?
I was gonna say, I always say people are messy and I'm counting on it, right? So,
Exactly. I constantly, in my work, I do the dance between the messy people part and the specific numbers part all the time. So I'm in the middle,
exactly.
in the middle of that mix. I did want to make a comment real quickly first about the California Fair Pay Act, and it specifically talks about differences in pay for same or similar work. So like if you are going to embark on some sort of audit of your pay practices with respect to the California Fair Pay Act, that means zooming in on what are the potential differences in pay within same or similar job titles, and can those differences be justified by tenure and performance, or sales levels for salespeople, or other bona fide business factors. And we're going to talk about what one of those bona fide business factors might be in a moment. But it's as Linda was saying, it's this broad brush look, like let's look across genders, across races for general trends and potential differences, and then it's within specific job titles. So just wanted to, did I say that correctly, Curtis?
Yeah, that's an accurate description of the requirement.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now let's zoom out a little bit for a few moments, again, for some context. You know, you've been hearing this morning about pay transparency laws and the fact that they do represent a continuation of the conversation that began in this country years ago with respect to pay equity, and specifically within California. And pay transparency is an opportunity for employer accountability, and it continues efforts to uncover pay disparities for disadvantaged groups and underrepresented groups. There's also just this whole new openness by people to discuss what they make. And this pay transparency and pay equity stuff is in the media all the time. It's something that's top of mind for your people, and they're hearing about these issues. If you haven't checked out Hannah Williams, the TikTok phenomenon, she interviews people on street corners, and she walks up to them with a mic. Hey, what do you do for a living, and how much do you make? And they tell her. Okay, so she's this link that you see in the slide would be fun for you to investigate after we're done with the webinar, because she really does kind of capture like why all this pay transparency stuff matters in a way that is digestible to people who aren't attorneys, etc. So it's a fun look. I'd also tell you that a recent Monster.com survey indicated 53% of survey participants would not apply to a job without a salary range posted. Pay transparency is a hot topic amongst employees, whether or not they live in a state or city covered by pay transparency legislation. Also, just this broader idea as it's linked to culture and helping you, taking this transparency idea and helping it to build trust with your people. People want to know that their pay is fair and equitable. And the more you can demonstrate to them how their pay is determined, the more they will assume it's fair. So again, this is a big picture idea that I'd like you to keep in mind. Of course, human beings always want more money. That's the way people are wired. It's in our DNA. They want a bigger salary. They want a bigger bonus. But we know from research that if you explain to them, this is how I arrived at your salary amount, and this is how I arrived at your annual cash bonus amount or your incentive amount, they will be typically more accepting of those numbers and kind of say, okay, I get it. It was arrived at in a well thought out way. So also, in this tight labor market we are in, culture is the #1 retention driver. Pay absolutely matters. It has to be competitive, especially now. But thinking in terms of using this pay transparency requirement that we now have through the law and using it as a way to build trust in the leadership of your organization is a real positive, I think. And believe me, I get all the administrative headaches. Those do not appeal to me at all either, okay? Also, with respect to people and culture, if you and the leadership at your organization don't tell them what's going on, they will make it up. There's somebody in every department and every group of people at your organization who's really the culture keeper. And you need to get them on board with what needs to be messaged to your people, because they drive culture more than you probably realize. And they will make up reality and socialize it throughout the whole place unless you and your leadership say, hey, this is what's going on with pay. This is how we determine your pay. This is how we look at it.
And Laura, let me just add to that as well, is because you and I both know this, a lot of employers, a lot of managers think that pay is the reason that people stay or go from a company. And yet we know from all of the culture work that we both do, it's not even in the top 5 usually, right?
That's
so
right.
The #1 reason people leave their bosses. And
That's right.
this is part of it, right? If the boss can't have a conversation to explain why, they're paying you the way they are, that doesn't bode well for keeping that employee around, to your point.
Yeah, so the questions you see on the screen are questions that I think you should get out in front of these. You should have all of the managers and leaders in your organization trained very soon in how to answer these questions about how pay is determined. How do you deliver pay? Are you delivering pay the way you say you are? what are you doing to share your pay equity commitment with people? Are you telling them, you know, the procedures and processes you're going through to make sure that pay is equitable and fair? And, you know, again, your people will start asking questions like this if they haven't already. And I think a great way to leverage this point in time and this opportunity with this new law is to get out in front of this topic and be proactive. Start answering these questions for your people proactively. Give them this information. Also, you should have a written compensation philosophy. That's a good idea even before pay transparency laws. And as you create a pay philosophy statement, you'll first need to step back and determine, okay, are we choosing at our organization to just stay with the letter of the law, which is a choice, or are we choosing to leverage this opportunity to build trust in our leadership? Which, by the way, trust in leadership is the most important element of employee culture. If people do not trust your leadership, you're dead in the water when it comes to culture. You're just, a lot of things are not going to go well if they do not trust your leadership. So, Linda, why don't we tell them about our shared client and our EEOC experience, where we were both appointed to work on a federal EEOC case and talk to the federal EEOC attorney about this. Do you want to tee it up, Linda?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we got called in because a now client of ours, right? We'll say made the mistake from the EEOC's point of view of paying a female outside sales rep in Nevada less than her male counterpart in California. And so for I think most reasonable people, our first thought is, yeah, of course they did, because the cost of living, the cost of labor in Nevada is a lot lower than it is in California. So Laura, why don't you tell them what the attorney said to you when you asked, why is that acceptable?
The crux of the whole thing was the fact that the employer did not state in their handbook, in the section that talks about compensation and how we determine pay for our people, they didn't say anything about the fact that they would pay people differently in different geographic areas, different cities, etc. And because they had not put that in writing in their handbook and their compensation philosophy statement, or you know, their written documents,
someplace. Yeah, someplace. Yeah, so what we do now, like, you know, we read a lot of handbooks, and for the last several years since that time, we've always made sure that we have a compensation philosophy statement in there. And it essentially says we're going to pay based on all of these things that you're supposed to be, you know, paid based on skill, responsibility, you know, all that kind of stuff, performance, everything, but also very specifically to say that we pay based on geographic differences, if in fact, you know, you have those. Let's take a look at some other specific situations that may arise from this. So these are the practical pay conversations, I'm calling them, right, that you need to have. So let's go back to our company. You know, they post the range for the warehouse worker at $20 to $25 an hour. We know that they have 6 employees that fall into that. So Laura, you know, the first employee is making $20 an hour. And of course, she should be asking this question, right? I'm at the low end of this range. I've been here for a year. How do I make more money? How do I move up in this range? You're telling me I'm at the low end of the range.
So the first 2 things I think about in this conversation are tenure and performance. So how does her tenure, how much tenure does she have, and how does that point to what she should be paid across this range of pay for her job? And when we look at tenure and performance, her pay should be lowest on the list, so to speak, because she has the least amount of tenure and perhaps lowest level of performance out of the people comparing to the other people in her job title. And as I alluded to earlier, I would really want to focus on helping her grow and develop and become better in her job. and coach her to do that, or coach her manager to help her do that, so that she could get a bigger merit increase next time it's time for a merit increase. And of course, also behind this is you need to make sure that you've got people lined up appropriately within each job title based on their tenure and performance.
Exactly. And I feel the same way. And I also think, even if it's informal, you know, most employees, they're going to stick around if they see a path to the future, right? So give them a career path, find out, like, think
Yes.
about what does it take to go from 20 to $25 an hour? Why are you paying some people more, right? Hopefully it's all legitimate reasons. And this is why for the last 5 years, we haven't been able to ask about salary history, right? You should be paying based on the skill and the responsibility for the position, right? Education, all of like you know, the allowed reasons, let's say that, and
Yeah.
definitely not based on not just gender, race, and things like that, but not based on who's the better negotiator, right? Not based on, well, he was making this much before, and so that's why he's making it now. So just be prepared and think, okay, what will it take if she can demonstrate certain things, right? If she learns certain things, however you want to look at or message it, just give them a path forward so they know to stick around and they don't go shopping someplace else.
Yeah, and then
So
make sure to share the path with everybody else in the job title too.
yeah,
So they
absolutely.
all have equal opportunity to advance.
So then we could potentially have the opposite of this, right? The guy that's at the high end of the range says, well, why should I stick around? If this is the high end of the range, where am I going to go? How would you suggest people handle that situation?
Again, I think it's thinking well about employee development and creating career paths. And so maybe the one who's at the high end of the range can be developed to be a lead in that area or a manager soon, depending on the structure of your department and your organization.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And find out, do they have other skills? Maybe it's a different job entirely, or maybe you are creating that senior position or, the next level up. And then the
Mm-hmm.
third one is, and this does happen, where the employee that's sort of in the middle, she's been there a year, right? And then she finds out when she talks to her coworker that, he just got hired, but he's making, $2 more than she is. And she's mad, right? She's assuming that there's gender discrimination going on, but what could this be, and what would you say to her?
Well, I would hope that the employer has the facts lined up correctly, and that in this example, the man brought to the job very, very specific, job specific experience, skill set, et cetera, that exceeds what the woman has in this example.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, be ready to explain like why you pay what you pay. And just a
Yeah.
reminder to everybody, California law says you cannot prohibit employees from discussing their wages. So does the NLRA. I'll just throw that in before Curtis, has a little stroke on me.
You know it.
But you can't tell the employees don't talk. And I always assume that everybody knows what everybody else makes. I mean, I even had that experience recently. We just got done doing performance appraisals at our company, and somebody said, well, I was hoping to get more because I know some people got raises on the anniversary and I didn't. And I was like, yeah, busted, so like we made an adjustment. Okay, there's some other comp issues that we want to talk about, Laura. Why don't you go through these and we'll take questions. So just as a reminder, if you haven't already dropped a question into the chat, now's the time to do so, because we just have 2 more slides and then we'll address those.
Okay, so I've spent a lot of time the last few years with clients, typically with hundreds of employees, where they need to raise the floor, the lowest amount they pay per hour, raise that floor on wages because of competitive pressures on wages the last few years. And so when you do that, you have to be very careful that you're not setting up, number one, morale issues. Like you can't just raise the floor and not create an appropriate ripple effect on up through the org chart, so to speak. And there are very specific ways to look at this question, but just suffice it to say, if you decide The lowest amount I pay can't be $18 an hour anymore because I just can't get anyone, who's qualified for that amount. So I'm going to raise the floor at my organization to 20. You've got to look at, okay, if I do that, where do I stand within same or similar job titles with respect to comparisons of pay across the people within each job title? And my differences still have to be based on tenure and performance, so I don't go sideways of the California Fair Pay Act. Estimated merit budgets for 2023. This may be old news, but in case you hadn't seen any of these numbers yet, most employers who are surveyed, who are in large organizations, budgeted at least 4% for their base pay increases for this year, or their merit increases for this year. About 25% of those budgeted 5 to 7%. So much bigger numbers than we've seen in the last 10 plus years. Another topic, cost of labor in different locations. So we alluded to this with respect to making sure that you do state in writing in the appropriate places that you do pay differently in different cost of labor locations. And in my world, yes, cost of living matters, but the data that I drill and focus on when it comes to pay in different cities and different locations is cost of labor. And with all the remote folks that we have now in the workplace, here's a quick example and a way to think about this. If you're based in San Jose, a high cost of labor and cost of living location, and then you've got somebody who moves to Memphis, let's say, and they're going to work remotely pretty much full time in Memphis, I would not cut their pay. Now, legally you can, but it would be a real morale buster in a tight labor market. Remembering employees are in the driver's seat right now, employers aren't. So not a good move to cut somebody's pay because they moved to a lower cost of labor area. But the next year after they move, when you're doing your annual merit increases, I would take into account the fact that they are now in a lower cost of labor location, and I think it's justifiable to give them a lower or smaller merit increase for the same level of performance as the folks in San Jose, because that's bringing into the picture cost of labor where people are located. Would you treat that at all differently, Curtis?
My recommendation for the first part of what you said is the same. If somebody's working here or in San Jose and they're at a specific rate that's competitive with that market, and they want to move somewhere else, and they move to a market that maybe has a little bit less cost of labor, I agree that you're going to want to pay that person the same, because that person doesn't have to. If you're going to tell that person you're going to cut their pay because they're moving to a lower labor market, that person doesn't have to accept that, and that person can leave and find a job somewhere else. So if you want to keep that person, and or if you don't want to keep that person, then you're going to be expected to hire somebody in that same, you're going to be expected to hire someone in your own market at that same rate. So it's probably not going to make a difference to your budget, to your balance sheet.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good point. And then Laura, that's what you mean by red circle rate also, right? The latter part, maybe explain that for people that don't know that phrase.
It can be related. So when someone's pay is at or above the top of their formal salary range, if you have formal salary ranges, if someone's pay is at or above the top of the range, we consider them red circled, meaning we're not going to increase their base pay until the ranges catch up with them, because the ranges go up every year. And then so their pay should fall back in the range eventually. Also, though, in that scenario, if the person's a great performer, I would give them a one-time lump sum merit increase that is equal to the amount, the percentage I would have given them as a base pay merit increase. I give it to them as a one-time check as a lump sum if they're over the top of the range.
As like a bonus, you're saying?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, perfect. All right, and then bring us home with this, and then we'll turn it back over to Denise for questions.
Yeah, just as I was saying earlier, if you don't tell them what reality is, they're going to make it up, and it's going to spread like wildfire all over the place. So great
Definitely.
leaders, great leaders get out in front of, especially including difficult topics. They don't run away from them. They don't turn away from them. They lean into them, and they tell people what they know when they know it. And I think this is an opportunity to do that with respect to pay. That's what
That's
I've
great.
got. Questions now?
Yeah, let's turn it back over to Denise.
Yeah, thanks, you guys. That's a lot of information. We do have a lot of questions. I just want to remind everybody that if we don't get to your question, we'll try to follow up with you after the webinar. There's a lot of questions, Laura, I'm going to direct this one to you. There's a lot of questions about how to create the salary ranges for companies if they don't have them. What is the easiest way for a company that perhaps has not done this in the past and needs to do this? What's the best way to do it?
To actually do this well, you do need to hire professional help. This is a very specialized area of HR. And for a smaller organization, I don't know, somewhere south of 40 or 50 employees, something can be, ranges can be built on spreadsheets, but there's very specific math behind the difference, the distances between the midpoints, and how we set up the minimums and the maximums, and how we treat non-exempt, exempt, and executive jobs. So there's a lot of detail to it. And if you're going to try to do this like as a spreadsheet exercise, it is absolutely necessary to purchase valid and reliable salary survey data. This is like anything else. If you find it for free on the internet, it just is not worth much, because the free data out there, I don't know the size of the companies it came from. I don't know anything about the location, the industry, etc. And I don't know how well that data was scrubbed by the entity that gathered the data, so I cannot rely on it.
Or
For
if it
larger,
was self-reported, which is the other thing I
exactly,
see a lot.
exactly. People in their pajamas at midnight are responding saying, I'm mad at my employer, so I'm going to go on Glassdoor or salary.com and tell them what I make. And usually
Right.
it's not even, it may not even be a true number. But anyway, if for organizations that are somewhere north of roughly 50 employees or so, I have an automated system for salary ranges called Compies that I market and support. And it is a phenomenal, cost-effective desktop tool for that provides ranges based on the size of the organization and the location or locations, and the ranges are updated every year, and it's a good tool.
Okay, great. We had a lot of questions about ranges and posting a range. So there's a couple of companies or a couple of questions that came in saying that they're a small company or they only have one person in a position. What do they use for a range?
Okay, I'll jump in on this one. Yeah, I'll jump in
Okay.
on this. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so that's a great question. So again, if you're a small employer, I mean, we don't have set ranges per se here at our company, and there's 13 of us, right? So, we do subscribe to some of the same salary data that Laura has. Again, we can certainly help you put those ranges together. If you don't want to do it that way, then you can use the data that you have. If you only have one person in that range, then I would not go out and post that exact dollar amount. You've decided to add a second warehouse worker and your first one's at 20, so I'm going to post it at 20. The law says a range, and so again, you would put in what you reasonably expect to pay for that. So maybe you would do $18 to $20 an hour or something like that, or 18 to 21, whatever, and just come up with a range based on what you reasonably expect to pay for that position. But I wouldn't just put a data point there. I wouldn't say $20 to $20, right? Unless that's really the only thing that you're going to consider.
Yeah, Linda, just to chime in here too. So the biggest takeaway for me from this webinar and going through the new laws is what Laura said about developing a pay philosophy. So even if you just have one employee and that employee asks for a pay range, or you have thousands of employees, the employer is essentially being forced by this law, even though it's not expressly written this way. Employers are being forced by this law to develop a pay philosophy for their employees, which they should realistically, from an HR perspective, already be doing. And your pay philosophy should take into account more data points, as you just mentioned, more data points than what somebody was most recently receiving. And I think that all employers, if they haven't done that already, need to do that, need to develop that pay philosophy. And if they need help, reach out to any of the three of us. But develop that pay philosophy so when somebody comes and asks for a pay scale, even if it's just one employee in one position, you can already tell them this is the pay scale and it's based on these bona fide factors that are not related to race or gender or sex, etc.
One thing too that I just wanted to throw out really quickly for folks who don't have formal ranges yet, not only is a set of formal ranges good from a market standpoint, it answers the questions, what do I have to pay to be externally competitive? They also give you the ability to compare your jobs within departments and within the organization and across the organization for pay purposes. So they're a really, I'm kind of a nerd about this, but I admit it, but they're a really nice structure for comparing your jobs to one another, and they give you the ability to do that for pay purposes beyond market pay only.
Hey, Laura
Laura,
and
does that
Curtis.
mean?
Oh,
Oops, sorry.
I
Go
I
ahead,
was
Linda.
I'm watching the time when we're coming up, but I also see that we have a ton of questions. Can you guys stick around for another couple minutes to answer some more questions?
Absolutely, I'm happy
Sure.
to.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Okay. So you're just talking, Laura. What about if someone has an internal opening or promotion that's not going to be posted, say, outside on a website, Indeed.com? Do they also have to have posted internally the salary range?
I would think so. Do you want to address that,
Yeah,
Curtis?
I'll chime in. I'll chime in
Yeah.
here, and the answer is yes. Even if it's an internal posting, it must still have the expected pay range.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a good question on, hang on one second, because we have so many that just came in. Okay. Should real transparency include additional employer expenses such as group insurance benefits, holiday pay, vacation, and sick pay, and a company issued cell phone? Do we have to include that?
You don't have to include that. The law says you have to basically post the base rate, right? So you have to think this through though about what's going to make you competitive. Because I also noticed a question here about, if you posted a hiring range, would it discourage somebody from applying that's making more than that? And it could, right? If I post 20 to 22 and the person's at 24, they don't know in my head I'm willing to pay higher than that, right? So it does work both ways. If you pay commission, bonuses, any other type of incentive compensation, you may want to include that, because I think of it this way, especially for a salesperson, maybe, I'm going to pay you a base, I'll even make it up. I'll pay you a base of $20 an hour, but you have the potential of making 100 grand a year, by selling, because you get a commission on sales. Well, if I just put $20 an hour down on my job posting, the odds are, that the sales rep out here is used to making six figures is not even going to look twice at that. So I do think that it's a good idea to consider what benefits you want to include or what additional compensation. The second thing I'll say, and then I'll see if Curtis or Laura wants to chime in here, is if anybody's ever heard of this called like a hidden paycheck, right? I think it's a good practice every once in a while to send the employees a hidden paycheck, meaning you show all of the things that you do contribute to them that they wouldn't necessarily even see, right? It's what falls below the line, the taxes, workers' comp, the amount you contribute toward their medical benefits. Like employees don't have necessarily the visibility into that unless you provide it, right? They don't recognize all that. And some of them may not even care, to be honest with you. It's not a paycheck they can spend, at the grocery store. But I think it goes a long way towards supporting your pay philosophies, to supporting pay transparency, to be saying like, look, this is everything that we have to offer, essentially.
I agree, Linda. I think since most employees have not run their own companies, they just don't understand how much money an employer has to spend on required benefits and optional benefits, or et cetera. I mean, the markup is usually 30 to 40% on base pay, and that's a lot. And I think it's important to keep reminding people that that's part of their total compensation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Other
We've had another question on, Linda, you were talking about reporting data for 100 plus people,
yeah.
and what the parameters are around that. Does the Pay Transparency Act break down? Does it cover if we have 100 people in a different division, or does it cover 100 people in a particular division?
If you have 100 people, period, anywhere, and you have at least one in California, you're going to have to comply with this law. So it doesn't go based on how many California employers you have or employees you have, right? So it doesn't matter divisions, whatever. You would have to report if you have separate divisions. If you're asking me, do each of those divisions have to have 100 or more? I don't believe that to be the case. I don't know though, as I'm thinking this out loud. Curtis or Laura, do either one of you know? So if they have, let's say they have 4 divisions, each with 30 employees in it, so it totals 100, they're subject. Is that 4 reports? Because I think it is.
I
Either one of
don't
you
know.
know?
I
Okay.
don't.
Remember a separate, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's definitely, it says really clearly that you have to report each establishment separately. I
Right.
don't think each establishment has to have 100 employees. I think the company overall has to have 100 employees. I'm sure when you get ready to report, it will tell you. But I would make sure, again, to collect that data now in whatever report that you have, keep track of the divisions or this, locations separately if you're going to have to report it that way. And then you'll know, when they provide the portal or whatever it is they're going to do.
Yeah, for accounting employees for the organization, it's the organization as a whole.
Right.
But the separate reports, I'm not clear on.
Okay. Can employees ask for any job scale internally, or only if a position is open?
Yeah, so the law actually has a definition of like applicant or candidate, it's somebody that's applying for a job. So if the position is posted, then they're entitled to it like any candidate is. Otherwise, they're only entitled to their own pay scale. So I can come to you, I can ask Laura and say, hey, Laura, I want to know how much Susie Q's making over there. Like, what are you paying Curtis, right? I can ask all day long, but she doesn't have to tell me. But if Curtis says, hey, what's the pay scale for my role? She has to tell him.
Yeah, but I think too, we need to be clear here though. It's different to ask, what is Susie making versus, oh, I'm interested in doing the job that Susie's doing right now. I want to do that someday. What's the range for that job? That's a completely separate question. And
Right.
while the act may not require employers to post ranges for all their jobs, I don't see a whole lot of reason not to, but I
I
understand
don't
that makes
disagree with
people
you.
uneasy.
No, I don't disagree with you. I mean, I'm answering the question what the law requires so people know, right? But I would agree with you. It's like, again, if I've done a good job developing career paths, if I'm saying to somebody, I mean, again, I've had these conversations with my employees over the last few weeks as we're doing reviews, right? Somebody yesterday said, like, how do I make more money? Like, how do I get to this level she's got in mind? Right. And so it's my job as her boss to say, here are the things I expect you to do in order to get to that place. If somebody wants to have a different role in the company, it's like, great, then let's talk about career pathing. Let's talk about the skills needed, right? We all should be prepared to have that conversation if that's what we want for our culture. If you want a law and order type culture, and I'm not going to share that information, then that's fine. That's your choice. I don't think it bodes well for you in this market to hire and retain good talent.
Mhm. Yeah, and if think about it, if you've got some people who are superstars who want to grow and progress and make more money, to me, it's an incentive to them to say, yeah, here's your career path. Here's a potential career ladder in the type of job or type of work that you're doing. And the one that's 2 rungs up the ladder from you, here's the salary range for it. And this is what you need to be able to do. These are the skills you need to qualify to apply for the job next time it's open. Can't guarantee you'll get it, but this is what you need to do to be ready to apply when it's open. And here's what the range would look like.
Right.
Let me ask you a quick question about documentation. A couple of questions came in about documentation. Should you document the conversations you have with the employees that they had asking about salary?
I mean, it doesn't hurt. I guess the context, right? I guess it's the context of the conversation and why somebody's asking. You know, if I'm sitting down with somebody and they want a really specific career path to make more money, to get a different job, to be promoted, whatever, and we come up with a plan to do that, and I say, these are things you need to do, and we're gonna measure that, then yeah, I would definitely document that. If you're asking, do I document every time somebody asks, so I keep some sort of secret file on people are asking about pay? No, probably don't need to do that, right? So it depends on the reason, you know, the point of the conversation and the reason, I think.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. There's one more question on, I don't know how you guys are doing on time, but one more question. Do we need to keep a file stating the ranges for employee positions on hand for any potential audits by the Labor Commission?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you have to keep, again, you have to keep their wage history, like an employee's wage history, you know, for 3 years, like their titles and wage history, 3 years. Well, that has to tie back to something, right? So they're going to need to see it, just like I would keep copies of all of the job postings, whether it's a screenshot or there's a way. I don't know, for example, I know Indeed's been requiring pay ranges for like about 6 months, right? You couldn't post without it. So they were ahead of the curve getting ready for this. I don't know in their system if you can print out a job posting that shows a range. Whatever it is in whatever system you're using, I would definitely do that. Worst case, take a screenshot and keep it. I would just put it all in a folder someplace.
Agree. Totally agree with what Linda
Ditto.
said.
Ditto. You can use the air quotes. Ditto.
Yeah, yes.
All right, one more question, Denise, then we'll wrap up.
Let's see, our corporate office is in California. We have remote employees in other states. Do we need to post a pay range on postings in states outside of California?
Okay, so where's the company based?
Our corporate office in California, but they have remote employees in other states. So do we need to post the pay range?
Yeah, my belief,
I would
Curtis,
still post it.
yeah, is that you have to. I believe that's the requirement. If you're in California, I think you post it for all of your jobs. If you're out of state and there's any expectation that this person is going to work in California or remote to California, I think is how the law is worded, you have a requirement to post the range. So if I'm in Oklahoma, I'm hiring somebody for California, I have to post the range. If I'm in California hiring someone in Oklahoma, but they're going to be working for me remotely and I'm in California, I got to post the range. So it does bring up interesting questions too. It's like, let's say, sort of back to Laura's example before, you know, you've got an employee that's in San Jose, they're going to move to Memphis. That's fine, right? But it's like, as you go posting jobs, what if you don't really care where the person's going to be located? If they're in Memphis, you're going to pay them less if you hire them there, right? Than if you hire them to work in San Jose, right? But you don't really care where they work. It's like, it's harder to come up with a range, right? Because you have to put something out there. So, you know, we've toyed around with best practices on this. Do you post the same range and fit them into that? Do you say, you know, here's the range for, you know, Memphis and post something in Memphis? Or do you say it's a bigger range and it's going to be depending in part upon where you live, right? There's different ways you can do it.
I think it's the second thing you said, Linda, if you're open to having the person work from almost anywhere.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's what it's going to come down to, because you're not going to want to pay for an ad every single city across the country, right? So you probably have a sense of where you would pull your talent from. So you could come up with geographic specific ranges, but I think it's probably easier to use the same range and then make a note someplace, in the posting that is, that the actual pay will be determined on a variety of factors, including geographic location.
That makes sense.
Laura, Curtis, Denise, thank you all so much for doing this today. I have the thank you slide up there, so you have all of our contact information. So if you have any questions about this, if you need any help developing ranges or questions, compensation in general, anything like that, just reach out to one of us. Also, if you have any suggestions on future webinar topics, just email them to me. We always want to know what you want. Curtis and I have some ideas for the next couple of ones. The other thing I didn't mention earlier, I'll just mention in closing, is that if you do need recertification credits, HRCI credits, anything like that, we did not apply ahead of time for this particular webinar, but you still can submit the webinar. You can still get credit for it. You just don't have, the pre-approved number, but you can still list it, and we'll have a record of your attendance as well. Okay, so on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for attending today. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.